It was November 3rd, 1870. The Civil War had ended 5 years earlier. The Confederacy no longer existed. The South was still suffering under Reconstruction. On that day, Jefferson Davis stood in front of a crowd in Richmond. He had come to speak about Robert E. Lee. Lee had died just 3 weeks earlier on October 12th at his home in Lexington. The general who had led Southern armies through 4 brutal years of war was gone. Davis, who had worked directly with Lee as president of the Confederacy, was one of the few people who truly understood what those years had cost him. Davis did not come that night to talk about battles won or lost, or to defend the old cause. He spoke simply as a man who had known Lee for decades, as a friend and as a leader. What he said was personal. It was honest. And it revealed a side of Robert E. Lee that most people never hear about today. This is the story of what Jefferson Davis really knew about Robert E. Lee. The meeting was held to start raising money for a monument to Lee. The room was full of people still hurting from the war. Davis himself had spent 2 years in prison after the war and faced heavy criticism. But on this night, he set politics aside and spoke from the heart. If you're enjoying this kind of deep historical storytelling, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It really helps me bring more stories like this to you. Jefferson Davis and Robert E. Lee first encountered each other at the United States Military Academy at West Point. Davis completed his studies in 1828, ranking 23rd in a class of 33. Lee arrived the next year and graduated second in the class of 1829 with no demerits, earning a reputation for discipline and excellence in engineering. Their professional connection strengthened during the Mexican-American War. In 1846, Davis commanded the 1st Mississippi Volunteer Regiment as a colonel. Lee, then a captain in the Corps of Engineers, served on General Winfield Scott's staff. Lee conducted critical reconnaissance missions through rugged terrain, contributing directly to victories at Contreras, Churubusco, and the storming of Chapultepec in September 1847. Davis witnessed Lee's composure under fire and later praised his engineering skill and courage. After the war ended in February 1848, both men returned to the regular U.S. Army. Davis served as a U.S. Senator from Mississippi and, from 1853 to 1857, as Secretary of War under President Franklin Pierce. In that role, he appointed Lee as Superintendent of West Point in 1852, a position Lee held until 1855. During these years, they maintained occasional correspondence and met on official military matters. By early 1861, the nation moved toward disunion. After Virginia seceded on April 17th, Lee declined an offer from President Abraham Lincoln to command Union forces. He resigned his U.S. Army commission on April 20th and offered his services to Virginia. Davis elected provisional president of the Confederacy on February 18, 1861, soon called upon Lee. Their shared military background and years of mutual respect created a solid foundation for the collaboration that would define the next 4 years. In June 1862, with the Union Army threatening Richmond, Davis appointed Lee to command the Army of Northern Virginia. Lee immediately launched the aggressive 7 Days Battles, June 25th to July 1st, 1862, driving General George B. McClellan's larger force away from the Confederate capital. Davis supported Lee's bold strategy despite heavy casualties and criticism from some cabinet members. The partnership continued to strengthen. In August 1862, Lee achieved a decisive victory at Second Manassas. Encouraged by the success, he led his army north across the Potomac River into Maryland. On September 17, 1862, the two armies clashed at Antietam in the bloodiest single day of the war. Although Lee was forced to withdraw, Davis never publicly blamed him for the invasion and continued to back his commander. The relationship faced its sternest test in the summer of 1863. Lee's second invasion of the North ended in defeat at Gettysburg, July 1st to 3rd. On July 31st, Lee wrote Davis offering his resignation, accepting full responsibility for the failure. Davis refused the offer in a gracious letter, stating he could find no one better suited to lead the Army. This exchange demonstrated the depth of trust between them. By early 1864, as Ulysses S. Grant began the Overland Campaign, Lee conducted a brilliant defensive struggle against superior numbers and resources. Even as the Confederacy suffered from severe shortages of men, food, and supplies, Davis granted Lee broad operational authority and maintained steady personal support. Throughout these years of intense pressure, their communication remained professional and respectful. Davis valued Lee's judgment, while Lee remained loyal to civilian leadership despite the immense difficulties. As the Confederacy's situation grew desperate in the winter of 1864 to 1865, Lee became increasingly candid with Davis. In January 1865, Lee wrote a detailed letter recommending the enlistment of enslaved black men into Confederate service. He argued that the Army desperately needed more soldiers and suggested offering freedom to those who volunteered. Davis initially hesitated, but eventually signed a bill on March 13, 1865, authorizing limited recruitment. This difficult conversation showed Lee's willingness to face harsh realities for the sake of the cause. In the final weeks of the war, as Union forces under Grant closed in on Richmond and Petersburg, Lee kept Davis informed through regular dispatches. On April 2, 1865, when the lines at Petersburg broke, Lee advised Davis to evacuate Richmond immediately. Lee then began the retreat westward with the Army of Northern Virginia. On April 9, 1865, at Appomattox Courthouse, Lee surrendered his army to Grant. In the days that followed, Lee urged Davis in private correspondence that further resistance, especially guerrilla warfare, would only bring more suffering to the Southern people. Davis wanted to continue the fight from the Deep South, but he ultimately respected Lee's assessment of the military situation. These private exchanges in the war's final months revealed the depth of their trust. Lee never publicly criticized Davis, and Davis continued to defend Lee's decisions even after defeat. Their relationship endured the collapse of the Confederacy without breaking. Robert E. Lee's health had been declining for several years after the war. He suffered from heart disease and severe rheumatism that made walking difficult. In the summer of 1870, his condition worsened. On September 28, 1870, while leading a prayer meeting at Washington College in Lexington, Virginia, where he served as president, Lee suffered a major stroke. He was carried home and remained bedridden for 2 weeks. Doctors could do little to help. Lee grew weaker each day. On October 12, 1870, at the age of 63, Robert E. Lee died peacefully at his home. His last words were reported as, "Strike the tent." News of his death spread quickly across the South and caused deep mourning. Thousands attended his funeral in Lexington. His death marked the end of an era for many Southerners who still looked to him as a symbol of dignity and leadership after the Confederacy's defeat. Just 3 weeks after Robert E. Lee's death, on November 3, 1870, Jefferson Davis stood before a large crowd in Richmond, Virginia. The meeting had been called to begin raising money for a monument to honor the fallen general. Many in the audience were still grieving, and the pain of the lost war remained fresh. Davis spoke not as a politician defending the Confederacy, but as a longtime friend. He told the gathering that he and Lee had known each other since their days at West Point. "Robert E. Lee was my associate and friend in the military academy," he said, "and we were friends until the hour of his death." He described their long years of service together, from the Mexican War through the difficult days of the Civil War. Then came the most memorable lines of the speech. Davis declared, "We passed through many sad scenes together, but I cannot remember that there was ever aught but perfect harmony between us. If ever there was difference of opinion, it was dissipated by discussion, and harmony was the result. I repeat, we never disagreed." He defended Lee against those who criticized him for lacking boldness. "I wish to say that I never knew Lee to falter to attempt anything ever man could dare." Davis praised Lee's complete lack of self-seeking ambition and his deep sense of duty. He also reminded the audience that Lee's loyalty was not limited to Virginia alone. "They do injustice to Lee who believe he fought only for Virginia," Davis said. "He was ready to go anywhere on any service for the good of his country." The speech was powerful because it came from the one man who had worked most closely with Lee during the entire war. Davis painted a picture of Lee as a man of rare character, selfless, trustworthy, and steady under pressure. These words offered a personal view of Lee that went far beyond battlefield stories. They revealed the deep mutual respect and quiet strength that defined their relationship. Davis's words that evening in Richmond created a strong impression on those who heard them. Many in the audience were moved by the honesty and warmth in his voice. Newspapers across the South reported the speech, praising Davis for highlighting Lee's noble character. For years afterward, Southern veterans and families quoted Davis's lines about perfect harmony and "we never disagreed" as proof of Lee's greatness. In 1881, Davis published his 2-volume book, The Rise and Fall of the Confederate Government. In it, he again spoke highly of Lee, calling him the greatest soldier of his time and defending his military decisions. However, the book focused more on justifying the Confederate cause than repeating the personal warmth of the 1870 speech. Other writers quickly built on Davis's praise. In the 1880s and 1890s, Lost Cause authors and magazines like the Southern Historical Society papers presented Lee as nearly perfect. They used Davis's words to strengthen the image of Lee as the ideal Southern gentleman. These books and articles helped turn Lee into a legendary figure, but they often left out the human details Davis had shared, the real friendship, the honest conversations, and the quiet trust between the two men. Jefferson Davis lived for another 20 years after delivering his tribute to Robert E. Lee. After the war, he faced poverty, imprisonment, and public criticism, but he continued writing and defending the Southern cause. In his later years, he lived quietly at his home called Beauvoir in Biloxi, Mississippi. In late November 1889, Davis fell ill while traveling. He developed pneumonia and returned home. On December 6, 1889, at the age of 81, Jefferson Davis died peacefully at Beauvoir with his wife Verena by his side. He was buried in Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond, the same city where he had spoken so warmly about Lee 19 years earlier. With Davis's passing, the last major voice that had known Robert E. Lee so intimately fell silent. What he revealed in 1870 remains one of the most honest and personal accounts we have of the real relationship between the Confederacy's president and its greatest general. Their story of trust, respect, and quiet harmony through the hardest years of American history deserves to be remembered beyond myths and modern debates. Thank you for watching this deep dive into a lesser-known chapter of Civil War history. If you enjoy these kinds of thoughtful, source-based historical stories, please subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss the next hidden story from America's past. Drop a comment below. What surprised you most about Jefferson Davis's words on Robert E. Lee? I read every comment. See you in the next video.